there are some gaps in the cybersecurity space there, and we need to do something to address the gaps that we're finding. If we don't do it, here's the risk, and here's what could potentially happen to your operations. Here's what potentially could happen to the business.
Hi, I'm Rourke Pollock, and this is the first season of the Secure Tracks podcast, where we host rail industry leaders to talk about operational rail technologies and cybersecurity. In this episode, we'll discuss how to implement a cybersecurity program for operational rail technology environments. I'm really excited today about our conversation because we're talking with Bill Heinrich, who probably has more IT and cybersecurity experience in the rail industry than 99.9% of our listeners. Bill works as a virtual CISO for hire today, but previously he worked 2.5 years as the Chief Information Security Officer for Amtrak, specifically addressing rail technology cybersecurity. Prior to that, Bill was at BNSF Railway for over 24 years and was the CISO for 8 years there. And prior to that, Bill worked in systems development for Union Pacific Railroad for over 13 years. Additionally, Bill hails from the great state of Texas like myself, so we do have that in common. So, Bill, welcome to the show today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rourke. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. Looking forward to the conversation we're going to have.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it very much so. So, Bill, before we get started, I'm always curious if you could tell us a little bit about your path into the IT and cybersecurity world, and specifically how you kind of blended those and got into the rail industry as well.
Sure. I started in the rail industry many years ago, like in 1979. I started in a yard office working on dispatching trains and doing various yard office functions. I was
Okay.
allowed to take a assessment test for
Mhm.
IT at that time, and in that day and age, companies really recruited their IT professionals from within the company, and so I passed the test, and that began my IT career in 1980. And so, as you mentioned already, I spent several years at Union Pacific and doing various applications development, system development functions. I went to BNSF, in 1993, and spent 20 plus years there. And I did all kinds of things there: systems development, infrastructure management, enterprise information management. They presented me with an opportunity. The current security guy at BNSF was retiring, and they presented me with an opportunity at that point in time to move from my role as enterprise information management director into the CISO role. And so I took an opportunity to do that, and then
Right.
the rest is kind of history.
Got it. Long and illustrious career. All right. Well, Bill, I think what we'd like to do today is use your career a bit and talk through maybe how you've progressed over the years, and use that as a way of starting to think about if you were a new CISO coming into the rail industry and specifically taking over responsibility for the cybersecurity risk within the operational rail tech environments, what that kind of program might look like. And hey, at the end of the day, maybe we help you from a virtual CISO perspective as well, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a new CSO has to understand the lay of the world when they sign up. So they spend their first 60, 90 days truly just understanding what's happening in the organization around cybersecurity,
Right.
trying to understand what kind of things have been implemented, what kind of technologies are out there in the rail industry. You have both the data center IT type functions, but
Hmm.
you also have the ICSOT world, which presents a whole other dimension of opportunity and responsibilities that and a lot of companies that don't have operational technologies don't have to worry about. So, the first 90 days or so, you need to do an assessment of where you are and what you have out there, and go
Right.
from there to see what kind of a program you need to implement, which area you need to focus on more. Typically, you're going to find, I think, that the IT cybersecurity functions are pretty well stuff, pretty well set up, and then things that probably aren't as well set up are in the ICS OT world.
Right. Yeah, and it's that operational rail technology environment that we want to talk about today. And
Right.
I'm curious, as let's if we start a little bit with your time at BNSF Railways. You served 8 years there as the CISO. What were your early experiences in starting to think about getting your hands around the cyber risk in the operational rail environments, and how did you go about doing that? And perhaps would you do something differently today than that first time around?
Yeah, back, yeah, in those days, there wasn't a lot of focus on the ICS OT space, so the operational technology space, and so
Right.
we knew that we had technology out there, and a lot of railroads, in the case, as in the case of BNSF, and was the case at Amtrak too, is that a lot of the operational technologies are implemented outside the IT organization. So there's not visibility
Right.
necessarily to that stuff. And so first of all, you need to understand how you're going to get visibility to it. What we did at BNSF is we started out just very rudimentary and just started doing network scans and trying to identify what was on the network. And then when we found something, we tried to evaluate that technology through port scans and other ways to see if we could determine what it was. And just started to build an inventory because we didn't even have an inventory at one time.
Hmm.
Um, so we started there. It was pretty rudimentary. Tried to get some some exposure to what we were doing through the leadership in the IT organization, and get some backing for the work that we needed to go off and do and protect that environment. So that's kind of where we started. Usually, really, just really basic network
Right.
scanning tools and so forth. Really didn't have much to work with, and then we come to find out that we had to really work with the non-IT business functions in order to understand really what was out there. And they were the ones that had put it out there, and they were the ones that knew where the stuff was, and they were the ones that knew if a third party was managing it or when they were managing it, and what we needed to do to start evaluating and protecting that stuff.
Yeah, Bill, it's a little bit surprising to me. You always hear people talking about the fragility, perhaps, of some of the operational systems relative to scanning those networks and not wanting to do anything actively on those networks. I'm surprised you were doing that yourself. Did that work? You running into any problems?
It's funny you should ask that question. Yeah. So I mean, it worked for the most part. We stumbled a couple times where we may have taken a control system down. One of the things that people need to understand is that, some of that technology that's out there is 40, 50 years old. And
Right.
it's a control system that does a very specific function. It does it very, very well. And it has done it very, very well for many, many years. Although one of the things that
Absolutely.
they are fragile, and they were built in a day and age where weren't as redundant or resilient as technology is today. So we did run into a couple opportunities where we scanned the device, did a port scan on it, and took the device down, and had to quickly work with the business functions to get that device back up so it didn't impact any of the operations of the railroad. So
That's one way
yeah.
to introduce yourself to the operations team.
Not the best way necessarily, but yeah, it is one way to do it.
I take it that's not necessarily something you would advise clients to do today.
No, yeah, there's other ways to go off and do that stuff, I think. And yeah, that was just a method we used, and went into it very naively and
Mm.
not thinking through that. And like I said, it was back in probably 2016, 2015, when there wasn't a whole lot of focus around this and not a lot of technology around to even help us.
Right,
So
right,
yeah.
right. So, as you started getting into the systems in the operational world, how did you think about the scope of the systems or the technologies that you looked at in the operations environment, and how did you start to put some structure around just even thinking about the risk, or perhaps even doing some initial evaluation or audit of the environment?
Well, we did. We looked at some of the, I would say, framework standards out there. There were some they're really, the NIST cybersecurity framework wasn't out there necessarily at that point in time. It was in early stages of development. We did refer to NIST, the 800-53 stuff.
Hmm.
We looked at the ISO 27001 stuff. We actually ended up using a tool from the Department of Homeland Security called their Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool, the CSET tool, which helped us work through asking the right questions about the technology. The tool was primarily built for the industrial control system world,
Right.
and so we were able to use that tool and ask questions about what was out there and try to initially come up with a risk rating for what we were seeing. And then, PTC was hot and heavy in the implementation at that point in time too. So we were getting some visibility around what we were doing to protect those assets that were supporting the positive train control system too. So it all kind of came together at that point in time, and we had to start risk grading various things that we needed to work on and figure out our strategy for what we were going to
Mhm.
do to protect that stuff.
Got it. Got it. You answered my next question. I was curious about the frameworks you were using back in that point in time. So
Yeah, our scope was pretty broad when we started. We just wanted to know, what's out there, and
right.
then we kind of had to narrow in on once we run into various things, try to figure out which ones were the assets that we wanted to focus on initially, because um, it just there was too much to start off, and as you go through it, you find out there's a lot of stuff out there. Some of
Mhm.
it has good protection around it, and some of it didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody starts recovery is kind of the first step, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Once you kind of got your hands around it, you kind of had a sense of perhaps the risk that might be in that environment. I guess the next step is starting to try to champion some efforts internally about how to address some of those risks and essentially drive awareness internally of some of the risks that you are now aware of, perhaps for the first time. How did you go about trying to champion that within the organization?
Yeah, at BNSF, probably didn't do as good a job as I could have done championing across with the business functions. Could have spent more time over there working with them to help them understand, why we were interested in that stuff and why we
Hmm.
were interested in putting protections around it. Initially, I was as a CISO, I was reporting up to the CIO, and we kind of kept our focus internally into the IT organization and why we had to be focusing on protecting those assets. The CIO was very much into doing what we could to protect that stuff, and so we started to implement uh, strategies around how to do it within the IT organization, not necessarily working with the business functions as closely.
Okay.
Most of our stuff was really going to be focused around how to do network segmentation, physical network segmentation, and we would work with the business as we were moving assets from one segment to another. But a lot of the work was done with the internal network team, and that network team at the time actually resided in IT. So we were able to work with the IT organization and had CIO support to start doing some work there.
Okay. So you started prioritizing at the network level and trying to segment once you got through the kind of assessment and audit phase.
Yeah, yeah, we knew that we needed to get some of those, especially those very fragile pieces of control systems out there, segmented off so that we could restrict what type of traffic hit that and who could actually go at those devices. So that seemed like the good first step for us was to figure out how to segment that stuff off.
Right. Right. That makes a lot of good sense. That makes good sense. Any hard earned lessons or failures that you learned from during those early stages?
Yeah, I already talked about one as being, have to being real careful what you'll go off and do, and how fast you want to go off and do that stuff, because those technologies do run the railroad. Now, what we have an impact wasn't necessarily around transportation management, but it was around a specific control system that managed a very specific thing,
Right.
and but taking it down actually delayed, a couple trains. So you have to be very careful how you head into this. if I had to do it all over again, I would spend more time working with the business functions that put it out there, and sit down and had more conversations with them around why they put it out there, and why the way they put it out there, and try to work with them more closely, to get buy-in and support from their side to do stuff.
How, if you were just looking at it from the network level, how did you go about understanding the functions of the systems and just operationally what the different applications and systems were responsible for in the operational environment?
Yeah, when we were doing our scans, of course, we came up with stuff that we found out there, and then we would start to build an inventory. It was pretty rudimentary. It was a spreadsheet of stuff, and
Hmm.
then we would take that over to the business functions. In this case, it was the engineering department, and start talking to them about what was out there and what it was used for, and then we would start to work with them to drill into the technology itself to see what kind of controls and protections were around that technology, around access control and things like that, criticality of the control system, and trying to understand what would happen if that control system went down, the risk around that, and those type of things.
Right, right. Okay. Well, that's part. So you were working with the engineering and the operations teams, just perhaps
Yeah.
not as much as you had.
Yeah, probably more reactive than proactive, and I would do it different if I would if I was doing it again, going into it, it'd be more proactive, and reaching out to them, and helping our teams to understand what was out there better, working with alongside them.
Right, right. Okay, that makes sense. Well, you did get a chance to do it again. I mean, yeah, after a long stint at BNSF Railways, I mean, you then moved to Amtrak to take over as CISO there. I'm curious. One, why make the move, and two, what was your charter as a new CISO coming into Amtrak?
Why make the move? Well, it was a big move, and one that didn't take lightly. The opportunity was to go in and build a cybersecurity program that they had some good stuff in place around the IT assets and the data center type stuff, but they were I guess weak in cybersecurity around the operational technology space. And so they wanted the current CISO there was retiring. They went to the
Mhm.
market to look for somebody that had operational technology, industrial control system backgrounds, and they looked specifically in the rail industry, and then outside a little bit. But that's where I was recruited then at that point in time, because of a little bit of experience I had at BNSF to come in and do that at Amtrak.
Got it. Got it. So you were the perfect fit coming into that role.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
Not that you will sell yourself that way, but so again, my thought is let's treat this conversation almost like a how-to for somebody that might be in the same seat today, worried about building cybersecurity kind of step by step in that operational rail and rail technology environment. So why don't you tell us? You came in with a charter to specifically, I think, focus on that rail tech environment, and tell us kind of, what were your first steps coming in that role, and how'd you go about maybe unlike the first time around you did it? How'd you go about kind of championing internally and getting some buy-in for your charter?
Well, unlike at BNSF, the role when I stepped into the role at Amtrak, they had already hired someone under the prior CISO. They had hired a third party to come in and do a full assessment on their industrial control systems network.
Okay.
And so, based on that assessment and the findings, um, they the board of directors and the CEO and the executive management was briefed on what was found in that report, and so there was some urgency put around being able to mitigate the risk that was found there. And so I stepped into it with a good step already taken place. Initially, if you're going to step into the role new, you would want to do that assessment yourself and try to understand what was
Right.
out there and what kind of risk posture each of those devices had. Fortunately, that was done already by the time I stepped into the role. So I really took what was done out of that study, and had the full support of the CEO and the executive management team to go off and do what we needed to do to close the gaps that were found in the study, which helped a lot actually. So when I went to work with the business functions that had implemented that technology. So, and in the case of Amtrak, again, it was within the operations team, but the engineering team within the operations team did most of that. And they actually were the ones that actually even managed the network at the operational technology level. So they not only managed the technologies that were put out there, but they managed the network itself. uh, the IT organization managed the IT network, and those two were plugged together, through a firewall and such. But at that connection is where the engineering department took over. So, in order to do anything in that space, you had to work through the executives over there and down through the organization to get support for what you wanted to go off and do. Fortunately, again, I came into it with a lot of high-level support from the organization to make this happen. So, if I
Right,
wasn't
right.
getting what I needed to have happen, it was pretty easy to, help them understand the charter I was given.
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic opportunity to step into. Uh,
Yeah,
let's let's assume it wasn't quite that far progressed, and you had to go sell internally and get people on board. What do you think that process looks like?
well, yeah, so you can do it, you can either do it internally yourself to do the assessment that that third party did for us,
Hmm.
which is what we were trying to do at BNSF, or you can hire somebody to do that and come out with a full risk assessment. That takes some money. It takes money either way, I guess. But you need to understand, if you don't have that study done, you got to get there, and so you got to understand the risk posture for all that technology that's out there. Once you understand that, it becomes a little easier to sell the chief operating officer that, hey, you have this technology out there, it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, but there are some gaps in the cybersecurity space there, and we need to do something to address the gaps that we're finding. If we don't do it, here's the risk, and here's what could potentially happen to your operations. Here's what potentially could happen to the business. And so you got to go. Cybersecurity, the CISO's role is a lot about managing risk and
Right.
communicating risk. And you've always got to have those conversations around, if we don't do something, here's what could happen, and sort of here's kind of what the potential impact of the business is.
It's
So I
always
would I would approach it that way too.
yeah, it's always turning it back into a risk management conversation, I assume.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Well, a lot of times, anytime I think anybody takes on a new job, one of the if you go read the advice of what to do in your first 90 days and these kinds of things, there's always advice about looking for early wins or some low hanging fruit that you can take advantage of and build some credibility, perhaps. Was there anything that you were able to do early on that helped build that credibility as a quick win, perhaps when you stepped into that role?
Um, yeah, on my security team, I had an individual. We had assigned an individual full time to doing industrial control system work, and she had a great relationship with the business at that point in time too. So that helped a lot, being able to step in there and work with them. But there were some things, that there were probably a dozen things that you would call low hanging fruit that
Hmm.
we were able to show them that, if we did these things, that we would increase our security posture greatly. And some of them were easier things to do. Some of them were not so easy to do, but we had a list of about a dozen things that would take probably a year or more to actually work through all those, because of the sensitivity to the control systems that are out there, and being able to implement those things, and roll the control system network over. But yeah, there were several things that we found, and they agreed once we found those things that those were opportunities or holes in what they were doing, and we got good support once we started working through these things, and they saw the risk around that.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of conversations around, here's what we found, here's why it's a problem, and here's what we recommend to fix it, and garnered their thought and got their feedback too. And if they had feedback on different ways to do it, we would listen to them.
Is it possible to give an example of any of those things without giving away anything proprietary or saying too much?
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues, one big issue in the industrial control system space is just around um, passwords. You know, uh,
Right.
a lot of passwords are easily guessed, or maybe some even default passwords. So we found some of that out there that
Okay.
you either had some easily guessed passwords or default passwords, you had non-expiring passwords, things like that.
Hmm.
So we implemented some technology. We rolled the technology we could into our Active Directory infrastructure, in that we could actually start enforcing our password management rules on the corporate level into the control system space. We also implemented some stuff around USB keys, because at that point in time you could just go off, go to Best Buy or whatever and buy your USB key and do what you
I
wanted to do
remember.
it. Yeah, so we would enforce standardized USB keys, and we don't allow those USB keys to be inserted in those devices. And they were keys that we knew that were secure. Um, we just there's some even just access control into the machine itself. There were third parties that supported some of it,
Right.
and they would have their own way to remote into those devices. So just changing that up and going through more of a corporate VPN solution, so that everybody was coming through a standard security infrastructure component actually to get to those devices. Had to work with the third parties and to get them moved over and do that. But those are some of the things that we worked with. There were some other things, simple things too, like just an incident response plan. There wasn't one for the set, for the incident for the industrial control system space, and who was going to be called when on what, and
Right.
what was going to be considered critical, and yeah. So there are some low hanging fruit things that you need to work on. Some other things. Because that technology's been out there for a while. Some of it, they're obsolete devices,
Hmm.
and some of it had operating systems or firmware that were not haven't been upgraded for a while. I think you'll find a lot of that with the control systems out there that have been out there for a while. So we worked with the business to be able to, if they needed to replace the technology, we had funding to help do that. Or if we just needed to apply a patch to get the device up to speed with firmware or operating systems, we were able to do that. That took a little longer because I mean, that has to be thoroughly tested out before you roll that out. So you need to
Right.
put that
Right.
patch on and fully test it out before you roll it into production. So that's why I said it. I mean, it might take a year or longer to do some of these things, because when you roll through that, you have to be careful how quickly you roll through that stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a challenging process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you spoke earlier. Thank you for giving us those examples. They're not things that are surprising. I mean, you see it in a lot of industrial environments. Certainly, the rail industry isn't immune. You spoke earlier about some of the frameworks that you considered in the early days when you were at BNSF, and what you applied in building kind of a program there. Today, or perhaps when you were at Amtrak, where do you start, and do did you have different frameworks and that you used as a baseline when you started over, I guess, during your time at Amtrak, or would you suggest even something different today?
Yeah. When we were there, we actually started adopting the CIS framework,
Hmm.
and we had signed on to that and started to roll that out across the IT infrastructure as well as the OT infrastructure.
Right.
um, Found out that maybe the organization wasn't as mature as we needed to roll a lot of that out. So we rolled back to the NIST cybersecurity framework on that stuff. So that's kind of,
Okay.
I think, where they landed and where they are today, and is measuring themselves against that framework.
Yeah. Well, it's a good framework because it's somewhat flexible, and
Right.
you can work it to fit your environment. I know a lot
Right.
of companies that are still using that, and it's the best one they've got. Um, as you think about diving into a new area, I mean, are there certain things that I know you talked about the early things that you were doing in the environment to improve your risk posture? Are there certain things that you look for to get a baseline of just certain technologies in place, kind of where do you start thinking about, technology wise from a cybersecurity standpoint? What's required? What's perhaps optional in the early days?
Are you speaking around which control systems are necessary and things, or you can speak? Are you speaking around the security tools and technologies? So I'm just trying to
Yeah,
understand the
I'm
question a little
thinking
better.
more along the lines of the security controls and technologies that you have in place in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, when I was at Amtrak, we were looking for tools that would help us uh, find
Hmm.
automatically find what was out there, automatically profile or fingerprint, what was out there, be able to give us the ability to see what kind of traffic was going in and out of those devices and whether or not there were some anomalies going on.
Okay.
Um, and down to the very specific rail tech components that are out there.
Right.
What we found before I left was that there's some very there are some ICS tools out there, OT tools out there, but they're
Hmm.
not they're not um, they're not defined, or they're not built for the rail tech space. They're really generic OT tools,
Okay.
and they will help you from a high level understand what you have out there. But as far as if you want to get down to the specifics around the rail technology, understanding what the different switches are doing out there, and or the various different components a an operational rail technology environment. They couldn't get down to that level as far as fingerprinting those things, and helping us understand how to manage those things. So there were some
Right.
challenges there. So the key to getting your hands around this stuff is being able to have visibility. First of all, is understanding what you have out there, and then once you have understand what you have out there, just trying to understand the posture of those things that are on there. What kind of technology you're running on those control systems? Is the firmware upgraded or not? How old is the hardware? Those type of things, and being able to understand what kind of traffic flow is normal
Hmm.
versus
Hmm.
what may not be so much normal. And so we didn't find a lot of technology at that time that would support us at that lower level. There
So
are,
you
like I said again, at a higher level in the OT space, there are things out there, but as you drill down and get finer grained, there weren't those tools out there.
got it. Got it. You were just trying to get beyond being able to, or having to do that manually, I assume.
Yeah, yeah, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we did. We spent a lot of time um, doing manual collection of things, and we needed to do that because we didn't have technology to do that. So we spent a few months just actually physically going to all the trackside bunkers,
I was about to say.
documenting what was in there and taking pictures. And but as soon as you capture that stuff, it's outdated because it's all manually captured. So we did build an initial inventory of that stuff, and we're able to then risk assess and understand which were opportunities that we needed to address first of all. But um, uh, there just wasn't an opportunity for us to do that in an automated way at the time.
Yeah, that's a lot of time in steel toe boots and a hard hat.
It is. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the people side of the equation. When it comes to cyber and getting it, especially getting into a new environment like the operational kind of rail technology environments, were there organizational things that you had to address in those early days, or new skill sets that you had to bring on, or what was necessary to execute against your charter?
Yeah, I was given. I was given this. I had just a small team, and wasn't given much resource to build beyond that small team. We did free up one individual that was 100% focused on the cybersecurity aspects around the control system technologies. Um, and she was primarily our interface into the business and helping them understand what needed to be done. A lot of the work needed to be done at Amtrak had to be done in the business function because of the way it was set up there.
Okay.
And so she would help them work through that and support them. And we did have some IT people outside of my team that would help us with like an Active Directory implementation or whatever. But yeah, so you need to have somebody on your team, obviously, that's focused and dedicated to control system world, understands that, and if they don't understand it, can build that skill and to learn, what to do there. Um, and then so that's what we did. I also built up my security operations team at that point in time. We had an internal
Hmm.
security operations team and built that up a little bit to uh, be focused a little bit more on what was going on in the control system world, the operational technology world. Um,
Yeah.
Today, I think, at Amtrak, they have actually invested more heavily in their cybersecurity team, and so they have a whole team of people very focused on rail tech itself, and so there's more people focused on it and working with the various security aspects of that. So, if minimally you need one person that's really focused on it, but it'd be nicer to have a team. I didn't have a team at that time. I had one person, but we were doing as good as we could with that one person.
Got it. Sounds like organizationally, then the big challenge was just having an organization that's focused on the IT part and an organization that's focused on the rail tech part of the
Yeah,
structure.
yeah, there's some overlap, but yeah, you need specific skills on both sides.
Right, right. Our last guest that we talked to on the show alluded to the same thing. They have their team separated into two different functional areas.
Yeah, yeah, it was all, yeah, exactly right. You need to do that because there are enough unique things in the rail tech space that you won't see in the IT cybersecurity space. Yeah,
Right, right, right. I know. As a CISO, obviously, a big part of the job is about communication. And you talked a little bit about the fact that you walked into a pretty good position there with not having to do a lot to get buy-in. But I know earlier you talked about being proactive with the operations team and driving collaboration there. And I'm curious, how you managed that part of the process, uh, building buy-in from the operations team, building collaboration, more importantly, probably with the operations teams. And are there tools or processes or things that you think help get the security organization and the operations teams kind of speaking the same language?
that that
Maybe
that
that's
is a
asking
challenge.
too much.
Yeah, that's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge because you're walking into that environment and um, there's not necessarily trust built up there. At the executive level, I had complete support of what we're doing and buy-in, and so at the chief operating officer level, at the chief engineer level, I had
Hmm.
all the support I needed to go off and do. But you're still stepping into a room of people who are actually doing the day-to-day work and are managing the day-to-day workers, and there's not there's not that trust relationship that you have, and so you have to you walk in to say I'm here to help you, and they're not necessarily thinking they need help, and so you have to walk uh, to walk through what you know, what you've seen, why it's important, help them understand the risk and what we're seeing from a risk posture, and helping them understand, what we're seeing from the outside world on ways that people can get in and do things.
Hmm.
And it's an education process on cybersecurity. They're very, the people I was working with at Amtrak on the business side, they were very, very good at managing network. They're very, very good managing their technologies. They keeping their functions doing what they needed to be doing, but they weren't necessarily as up to speed on the cybersecurity risks and cybersecurity issues that were out there in the world. So it was helping them understand that, and then working with them to start implementing some of these low hanging fruit things to show them that we're not here to badmouth you. We're not here to belittle you. We're here actually to work alongside you and make things better. And it took a while. I mean, it just takes a while. You have to do things side by side and get things done and build that trust relationship. I think after we did a few things with them, that they began to understand that I wasn't going to go up to the executives and say, hey, they did a bunch of bad work. No, I was going to just say that we're working together and we have these initiatives and we're making progress on them. So.
Yeah. I think you probably hit the key. Is it's about trust and building a relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell me about the vendor community and managing and working with the vendor community in the operational environment.
Yeah, um, yeah, so it is a complex world because in some cases the vendors themselves are doing the work on the control systems. It's not necessarily your Amtrak or BNSF. It's actually a third party that actually rolled out the technology or whatever that does that.
Right.
Um, Getting them to buy into what you're doing as far as rolling out, they're used to a looser access around that, a looser ability to get in and help support those technologies that they've been hired to support. So we had to work with them to understand that that wasn't the best way to do business, and help them understand that going through a more secure way to get into the systems to support the systems
Yeah.
was a better thing for the company and then for them long term also. And it's a tough thing because they they existed for years, being able to do it the way they wanted to do it and how they did it, and changing, having to change business process up for them. But we work through those issues. But yeah, you're going to have some pushback on why we need to do that, and you're making it harder on me, and so forth.
Hmm. Yep. Understood. Makes sense. So let's one final step. I know in your role, a big part of it is reporting on the value or the impact that you're having in the organization. And curious, how you went about reporting the value of the security programs you were implementing in the operational rail tech environment, whether it was to the board, your internal stakeholders at your level, even your own teams or the operations teams themselves. What did that process look like?
Yeah. So I got a lot of visibility at the executive level in the company
For
because
better or
of,
worse?
yeah. Yeah. Well, I was invited into the every other month board meetings. They had a board committee that was focused on safety and security, and I was one of the discussion topics in that subcommittee. And so every other month I would have to come in and talk about what we're doing in the cybersecurity space, what we're seeing, how we're going about rolling out the initiatives, those low hanging fruit initiatives, as well as what the strategy was going to be to fix all these problems longer term. To get past the low hanging fruit, we still needed to um, think about network segmentation and automated asset inventory collection and assessment and so forth.
Mhm.
So I would go in every other month and communicate to the board the initiatives that we're working on, the status of those initiatives, how much we're spending. I would also meet with the CEO occasionally also to talk about here's some things we're finding, and here's what we're doing about it, and here's kind of the money we're spending, and pretty much I won't say I had an open checkbook, but I had a lot of support from the CEO, and to go off and do what we need to address. So, but we know what came with that then is making sure we report back frequently on what we're doing, and showing that we're actually being responsible for what we're being given, and we're actually making progress to close the gaps that were found, and increasing the risk posture for the company.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like it all comes back to managing risk again and reporting on how you're doing that.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, Bill, I know time goes fast when you're having fun.
Yeah.
But as we wrap up a little bit, anything that we might not have touched on that you think is perhaps critically important for somebody in that seat that you would give as a last bit of final advice?
I think we pretty much covered it. Building relationships obviously is hugely important. Getting understanding your world is key to getting the support you need to go off and do what you need to do.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I think we talked through most of the things that we need to worry about. If you understand your world and understand the risk that's in the world, you're able to communicate then, what needs to be done, what controls need to be put in place, what kind of investments we need to make in either building up the security team or investing in technologies, and being able to show the benefit of that.
Right, right. Well, that's awesome, Bill. So, Bill, if someone wanted to get in contact with you, are there any social media platforms, or what's the best way for somebody to contact you if they wanted to chat?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, and
Okay.
out there is William Heinrich. I also have an LLC set up for the CISO business, and it's Strong Tower Cybersecurity. Don't have a website yet, but I do have an email address, which is william.heinrich@strongtowercybersecurity.com.
All right. Perfect. Well, Bill, we certainly thank you very much for joining the show today. We certainly appreciate it. I think your advice has been spot on. Fantastic to be able to share your expertise with the folks on our show. That is the end of our show today. So until next time, keep those tracks secure. Thank you.